whenever I get passionate about something, I kind of think through my writing. And verbally, I probably go a bit quiet, but when I have a pen in my hand or a keyboard, I just love being able to explore deep into topics. I love the research angle. I love seeing where it takes me. And I just find writing just clears my brain as well, so I can then have another adventure. Gets it all out of my head and helps me make sense of the world.
Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Anna Featherstone about how to keep nonfiction fresh, including maintaining the human touch in the age of AI, the importance of fresh perspectives, effective book proposals, and integrating multiple viewpoints. Anna also emphasizes the need for authenticity, the strategic exclusion of outdated or overly technical information, and innovative formats that can enhance the reader's experience. And a quick request before we get to the interview. If you've gotten value from the podcast, please think of a writer friend you believe would benefit as well, and drop them a note with a link to the backlist episodes found at theindyauthor.com/podcast. If they're new to the publishing process, they might want to start out with episodes 101 through 107, the 7 processes of publishing with Orna Ross of the Alliance of Independent Authors. And now let's hear from Anna Featherstone about how to keep nonfiction fresh. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Anna Featherstone. Hey, Anna, how are you doing?
Hello, Matty. I'm doing great, thank you.
It is lovely to have you here and to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you. Anna Featherstone mentors and empowers writers who value practical, warm, wise, and creative advice during the various stages of writing, publishing, and marketing their words. She's the author of 5 nonfiction books, a judge of the Australian Business Book Awards, and the nonfiction book advisor to the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is how I got to meet her.
Yeah.
Anna is also the founder of Bold Authors, a collaborative online hub where publishing insiders share their insights about writing, publishing, and book marketing. And when she's not being bookish, Anna is a seed saver and is into bees, beings, and the big issues of our time. So I almost wore my Bumblebee t-shirt, but
Aw.
you wouldn't be able to see very much of it on. I was on a cruise and I had my Bumblebee t-shirt on, and I walked by this woman who had a butterfly t-shirt on. She was like, "I love your bee t-shirt." And I said, "I
Aw.
love your butterfly t-shirt." So we nerded out about bees and butterflies for a little bit. But I invited Anne on the podcast sort of in her as an extension of her expertise as the nonfiction book advisor to ALLi. And that is to talk about how to keep nonfiction fresh. And as I was thinking through this topic before we signed on, I realized that another way to think about this would be also how to keep nonfiction human, because I think everybody's concerned about
Mm.
what AI is going to be doing. And I think that some of the tips you're going to be sharing are ways that we as actual human writers can continue making our work more compelling than what gets cranked out of AI. But to set the stage for a conversation, I thought it would just be interesting to talk about what motivated you to get into nonfiction writing to begin with.
Wow. Just whenever I get passionate about something, I kind of think through my writing. And I'm verbally, I probably go a bit quiet, but when I have a pen in my hand or a keyboard, I just love being able to explore deep into topics. I love the research angle. I love seeing where it takes me. And I just find writing just clears my brain as well, so I can then have another adventure. Gets it all out of my head and helps me, yeah, make sense. I think other people say this helps me make sense of the world. And as a kind of author advocate, I absolutely just love reading nonfiction. It's my favorite thing in the world, learning about others, the empathy it develops, just being able to be inside someone's head in a different situation or learn something new. I don't know, it just fills me up.
And when you talk about, we're going to be talking about how to keep nonfiction fresh. Is there a particular type of nonfiction you're thinking of? Like, is this book length works, or does it apply to articles, essays, any other kinds of nonfiction people might be writing?
Yeah, you can use any, you know, the way to keep anything fresh. I mean, you don't want people reading your work and closing it down. You don't want them either flicking through the article or just dropping your book back to the library with only a few pages read. So I think keeping it fresh is so important. It's important for writers as well. You don't want to be bored when you're writing. That comes through onto the page, and maybe you should be working on a different project if you're bored.
And did you come up with this idea of keeping nonfiction fresh by having an experience where it was not feeling fresh and you felt like you had to freshen things up for yourself?
I What I do actually, if I'm not feeling fresh when I'm writing, I actually put the project away. And I know other people say, no, you've got to stick with it and get it done. But I feel like I owe it to readers that I need that energy coming through on the page. And I know you can go back and get it in the second draft, but I suppose what I do, I actually write a whole book proposal before I start writing a book anyway. And I figure if I still have passion at the end of writing the entire book proposal, then I have it within me to complete the book. But I've written a number of book proposals and I've gotten through, I've done all the research, I've written the first chapter, and I'm like, do you know what? I know that could sell. I know that would be a great book, but I just don't want to write it. So I kind of filter out projects by going through that process.
And are you writing these proposals for your own use, or are you writing them in order to pitch the books to somebody else? What are you using the proposals for?
Or it's really, I suppose, to plan a book. And it's also if I want to pitch to a publisher or if I'm going to indie author it myself. But I also read a lot of proposals from other writers as well. So that gives me a sense. And I suppose when you ask about the freshness thing, as a judge of the Australian Business Book Awards, I am across a lot of books. And it's just amazing how quickly you can see if there's freshness in a book. And that's actually what makes it readable in the end. If something's really dry or if it's just rehashing things you've heard before, there's no freshness there. And I suppose that's what I look for. What's that X factor in a book?
Yeah. I think that early on when ChatGPT or other AI platforms started becoming available to
Mm.
people to use, it was very impressive. I mean, I think people sort of make fun of it now, but I remember hearing a episode of Hard Fork, the New York Times podcast, and they were kind of complaining about the stupid mistakes AI was making. And he said, let's all stop pretending that we're not impressed that this tool passed the bar exam. And so there was this period where it was just so extraordinary that it was doing
Mm.
anything. And you could ask it some question, it would spit something out. And well, I shouldn't be saying you. I would read it and I would think, it's like pretty impressive. But then I think the honeymoon period is wearing off where people are being less just flabbergasted that a machine can do this and looking at it more critically. And oftentimes I think it's that rote recitation of fact that is
Mm.
what makes the output of that something that's useful as a starting point, but not anything you'd want to sit down and read with a cup of tea in the evening.
And do you know what's interesting? Like my take on AI is you, I don't actually want to feed in my fresh ideas into there to improve them because I'm really just giving my great ideas that I've come up with personally into a machine that's then going to just spit them back out. So I actually have slowed down on a project because I was thinking, oh, I should use AI and just use its. And then I was like, actually, no, I don't want to do that. I want to keep my ideas fresh and from me because they're what I've come up with and it's my take. Yeah, so I'm kind of like, no, I'm not going to use AI on my current project. Yeah,
Yeah.
except for like pro writing aid or something just to clean
Yeah.
it up at the end. But yeah, I don't really want to spill on my beans.
Well, I'm still interested in this proposal idea because it does feel like the equivalent of an outline for a fiction writer. And I think
Yeah.
that a lot of times the pushback that one will get about proposing, outlining, or framing out a story ahead of time is it takes away some of the spontaneity or the freshness, for example. And so talk a little bit about how you get around the possible danger that writing down the proposal, writing down your
Yeah.
ideas are going to take away the freshness of the work.
I think it's because it's what happens at the end of writing the proposal. It's like if I actually still have the energy, then I know it's the right book to write. So it's all part of that process. Also, it makes me really think, well, what points do I really want to put through in this book? What are the comp titles? Where is my market for this book? Why do I really want to write it? So for me, it does take away some of my projects because I'm like, actually, I'm not feeling it at the
Yeah.
end of this. I can't be bothered. But then the other ones, I'm like, yeah, this is worth doing. That means I'm fully committed. And then I'll go at it like full on. And that's when I actually tell people I'm writing a book about this. So once I've gone through that, and then I'm straight into getting interviews with people, and then I'm once I've asked people for interviews, I can't turn back on that book because then I'd let those people down. I'd have wasted their time. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like it gives me a momentum.
Yeah.
Like, but this is the other thing about freshness in a book. It's about perspective as well. So what perspective are you bringing as an author to a nonfiction book or for fiction? So I'm like thinking, and these are like maybe extreme examples, how many men have written books on knitting? Okay, that's a fresh perspective.
Mhm.
How many kids or teenagers have written books on parenting? That's a unique perspective. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, what angle do you come in at? And I was thinking, like, all these dating books, they're written by psychologists. Well, what about like a zoo expert, an animal behavior expert writes a dating book? Or do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you can get perspective by flipping things just a little,
Yeah.
and that brings its own freshness. You're not competing in the same marketplace. You're bringing something different that holds the book together. I was thinking, like, when the romance writer writes the dating book, that's
Yeah.
cool. So not just another psychologist.
So you've mentioned some of the things you're putting into the proposal. How long are these proposals, and what are some things you include in them that might be surprising to people who are hearing the idea of a nonfiction book proposal?
Oh, isn't that funny? Because to me, it's just like that standard thing. It's kind of what you'd have to provide to a literary agent or to a publisher. And I just do it for myself initially. I don't know if there's anything too surprising. So it's, what's the basic idea? Where would your book sit in the marketplace? What is the unique thing you bring to this book? The perspective as the author. Who is the target audience? Who's the primary and the secondary audience? What are all my marketing ideas, just straight up front? How would I market this book? And who are the experts I would interview? And that's also where some of that freshness can come from. So a lot of people just rehash quotes from books. Some of those business books, those quotes just get repeated all the time. Or Oprah said this, or Guru Swami said that. So I'm like, for that freshness, I look for experts who haven't been spoken to, or I kind of call them like the up and comers, not the already doners.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of who you speak to in your network or the new network you create that adds freshness as well.
Yeah, you could bring in some of those ideas, like interviewing the teenagers for the book about parenting, even if it's not the teenager writing the book, representing their perspective in there.
Yeah. And the freshness also comes from maybe your book you co-author with a teenager.
Yes.
Or you co-author with family members. There's a great lady in Australia called Sarah Martin, and she wanted to bring awareness to mental health issues. And her daughter had a psychotic episode when traveling overseas. Now, she's written a memoir about this journey and all the process and how the family has gone. But she included not just her perspective, but her son, who also traveled with her to pick up the daughter, and the daughter's perspective. So you get this wonderful 360-degree story that makes a book much stronger than if it was just one person's perspective. So you might not necessarily do a full co-authorship, but maybe you have other people come in and write a chapter or do a little footnote at the end of, well, actually, that's not how I saw it. I saw it this way. So that kind of a thing adds freshness too. I think too, it takes a bit of the pressure off an author because you don't have to write the 80,000 words. And you get other people to add maybe 10,000. And yeah, I think that's interesting, an interesting way to add that freshness too.
It's very interesting. I mean, it's always interesting to talk to creators and hear how the different ways that they approach things. So I'm trying to hold my own nonfiction writing up to this. And I realize that so far it's sounding quite different in the sense that what has normally led to the nonfiction books I've written has been that I've had a couple of ideas that I thought, oh, those are clever. And I don't think I've ever heard them from anyone else anymore. So I'll
Mhm.
write them down somewhere. And then days or weeks or even months can go by. And I'll have some more ideas that I think are clever and useful. And I'll put those somewhere. And then I start saying that there's developing a theme about like how to be an excellent podcast guest, for example, which is a
Yeah.
book that I'm still
Oh, I
collecting
should have
stuff on.
read that.
So far,
You'd be
so
reading
good.
that before we talked. Can you get that done? Yeah.
That up right away. And then I think that, I mean, the thing that intrigued me about this is that I have to admit, and I hope this doesn't keep anyone from buying my nonfiction books, but I hadn't thought of the freshness aspect as much as I like the idea of organizing things in a way that's maybe different than people are used to seeing them. And then having the links between the information I'm sharing be very tight. So it feels much more kind of analytical than fresh. I mean, I hope it's fresh because I hope the different ideas that I'm sharing, which are connected
Yeah.
with sort of the nuts and bolts information that I think everybody needs to have about whatever the topic is. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because it feels like
Cool.
it sounds like you're starting from the idea and becoming more and more detailed, and I'm kind of collecting the bits and pieces and
Yeah.
packing them
I think
together.
they both work. Both ways work. And some books would just want the facts. Some books would just want the tools just to go and run with it. But it doesn't mean you can't add in little side notes or little examples. And yeah, I think the process works both ways because we're always collecting ideas, aren't we, in our heads before we even think to write a book because there's something there going, oh, there's something in this, there's something in this. And yeah, so I suppose it's just then taking that and working out how to apply freshness. So for what you're doing, sometimes I'm like, it's what you leave out of a book that can make it fresh too. So things like these days, you wouldn't want to add too much information about specific technology because things can change so quickly. Social media platforms, you want to keep your book as green for as long as possible. So I think, well, what actually has to be in the book and what could I actually add to my website as
Yeah.
like an appendix or an updated page that I can always update? So it doesn't actually have to be in the guts of the book. And that could be great for some things because it means like maybe your book can be 20,000 words less. And it also gives, so it's better for the environment, it's better for pricing. It also means, though, that you've got a reason for people to come to your website to sign up for more information or to get that bonus chapter. I read a manuscript recently for someone, and it was just obvious to me there are a few chapters that could easily just be bonuses. They didn't need to slow down the book,
Mhm.
but they might be really great of interest to people, but I didn't think they should be in the book itself. So that's the freshness too, being able to keep that pace in a book by stripping some things out and popping them somewhere else or into a workbook or what else can you do? And I suppose some books actually shouldn't be written at all. Like perhaps your ideas would be better as an app or as a podcast or something a little bit different. Maybe your thoughts actually should be a series of cards, of greeting cards. Does it actually need to be a book? It was funny. I said that to someone the other day because they had beautiful writing. They're like, how do I make money from a $10 book of poetry? I'm like, you turn every poem into a greeting card because people
Yeah.
will pay $10 for a beautiful card or $5 and you've got 30 in your book. So, but they won't put down money on a poetry book. So sometimes your format of your thoughts can be fresh. So, yeah, not necessarily a book. Or if it's a book, maybe it's in a different size or a different packaging or yeah, or it's got something added to it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that it makes me think of Joshua Esso, who was a guest on the podcast way, way back, had a Kickstarter that was how to write action scenes and how to write love scenes or something like that. Joshua,
All
if I'm
right.
getting this wrong, I apologize. But it was back where it was so that if you looked at the book and you would open it up and it would be like how to write action scenes, and then you would flip it over and what would be the back cover was actually the front cover of the other topic. And that was
Yes.
if you wanted to write love scenes. I thought
Yeah.
that was very clever.
That's wonderful. And some books that have been coming out that you can actually color in the cover yourself.
Yeah.
So there's different ways to make a book fresh,
Yeah. I like that
which is
idea, what
exciting.
you were saying about perhaps not putting technology information in the book. I certainly do that. My goal is always to make my nonfiction as evergreen as possible because once I put it out there, I don't want to have to
Yeah.
be revisiting it every year or to update like what kind
No.
of mic I'm recommending or something
Yeah.
like that. But it is interesting from the point of view of thinking about keeping things fresh that you can imagine that a strategy for writing and publishing could be I'm looking for the next big thing, the next new thing. I'm going to write a book about it, quickly write a book about it. AI is a perfect example.
Yeah.
There are like a bazillion books about AI now that are going to be outdated in 6 months. But I hope that the authors of those books recognize that. And they were saying, I'm capitalizing on this moment in time
Yeah.
and I'm I'm just recognizing that I'm not going to still be selling this book in 2 years.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
my feeling is I want everything that's in there to be more or less evergreen so that I might go in every couple of years to make tweaks, but
Yeah.
it's not something I have to revisit regularly.
Yeah. And sometimes, like with case studies, when I include case studies in a book, so not necessarily technology, but a case study, I actually say at the beginning of the book how grateful I am that these people shared their story. But by the time you read this book, they may be doing something completely different. But this is one moment in their journey that you'll still learn from. It doesn't matter if they're not still doing those same things later. There's
Right.
still something within that. So sometimes I suppose preempting that things will become out of date with that kind of a message can help as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're interviewing people, it becomes not just part of the freshness of your book, it gives you marketing opportunities as well. So I say, like, expand your network, not just your county, not just your country, but go internationally if you can. Like, that brings such different perspective to a book if you get an international viewpoint that may really lift the book that you're writing. So it's who you go out to. And rather than worry that they're going to say no, that's okay. If 10 people say no, but you send out 20 requests, you still have the opportunity to use 10 great quotes or 10 great case studies. I think one thing I've learned though is even though people say yes, sometimes you actually don't get the material that you want or is of a high standard or fits your book. So that's where you have to have some confidence to be able to actually go back and say, thank you so much. We had such a great response. We're not going to be able to use your full interview, or you say it in a great way, but I think that's part of freshness too. And what we talked about is what you leave out. So even if you get, 1,000 words sent to you by an expert or someone answers all your questions, strip out, get down to the core of what's actually going to benefit your reader. And
Yeah.
it can be hard to go back and say, thanks, we've only got this one sentence, but that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you want
Um,
people to read it. If you're writing memoir as well. So how do you freshen up a memoir, especially if it's been written about past events? So one way to do that is obviously you write beautifully. So it feels alive. So you're adding in all the senses, the sounds. You're really taking the person to that place. So that can be fresh. But you could also revisit the places as an adult. So, or go to somewhere that is current and compare or talk about the feelings. So that might bring a book that was written about the 80s or the 70s. It makes it much more modern in some ways and gives it that freshness. And it will also elevate a book because you're getting those senses yourself. So you're able to write more about them. You also can make contacts in a region by doing a revisit and say, oh, I'm writing a book about X. So that starts your network, your marketing potential as well.
I like the idea of involving all the senses, and I can think of ways to apply that beyond memoir. So, for example, if I'm thinking about this eventual How to Excel as a Podcast Guest book, including things like, do you find that you're all sweaty by the time the interview
Yeah.
starts because you're nervous, or was your stomach churning, or do you
Yeah.
get so excited about the interview that you're waving your hands in a way that's messing up the focus of your camera or something like that, and not have it be a more actively involving reading experience for the reader than I think a lot of nonfiction tends to be.
Yeah. And for your book as well, going out to people and saying, what was your worst experience as a guest?
Yeah,
What went wrong? And that adds humor. Humor is a
yeah,
great way to freshen things up because it triggers something in our brain as a reader to go, oh, gee, if that happened to me, or that just so funny. Like just coming for this podcast, I was like, okay, I've got to do that, get all that ready. And then, oh no, I forgot it was going to be a bit darker. I need a lot. So all that kind of, yeah, all that makes it nice and fresh,
yeah. I think
adding perspective.
that common advice about sharing stories, and especially stories about oneself, is an automatic way to keep it fresh because you're the only person who's going to be able to share the stories about yourself that will effectively illustrate the points that you want to make in your book, and that's always fun for the reader and hopefully fun for the writer as well to reveal
Yeah.
some of those things. You had talked a little bit about the marketing, you've been referring to marketing like suggesting the idea of getting interviews with people. We were talking about getting interviews to gather content for the book, but then there's the idea of the interviews that you'd want to do. Is there a way that nonfiction authors should be thinking about pitching their book to potential bloggers, podcasters, reviewers, what have you, in a way that will make it obvious that the content is fresh?
Oh, how to make it obvious that it's fresh to a podcaster. I suppose it's how you write about it as well. So it's snappy. Like, do you like getting snappy, like emails that are short and snappy that just have some dot points about what they can speak on or what's interesting? So I
Yeah,
suppose, yeah,
I
it's
definitely
about
like those over,
distilling.
like, I let me go back in time to when I was 6 years old and I first picked up a pencil. I'm like, "Oh, no."
Yes, exactly. So, oh, that's a great point. So it's distilling those 50,000 or 60,000 words into just key hot points and targeting them to the right audience. So a different host isn't going to be interested in that. They might be interested in that. So you also need to listen to the podcast and know what you're pitching for. I think it's about self-awareness, Maddie, in a lot of ways. Not everyone's going to be interested in our story. So it's finding the ones who are, but don't expect people on the fringe in a totally different area to think your book's the latest and greatest and they want you, because why would they? You have to make it obvious. And I do think bullet points are a great way. Everyone's so busy. We're all reading so much.
Yeah, and I think it's possible also to bring a fresh perspective to maybe information that isn't necessarily cutting edge or
Yeah.
completely new. But for example, in my book, The Indie Author's Guide to Podcasting for Authors, I love the nautical metaphor. And so I built it all around a nautical metaphor. And at the beginning of each chapter, there was
Yep.
a little quote that was originally
Hmm.
related to like sailing or shipwrecks or
Yeah.
swimming
Yeah.
or some kind of
Beautiful.
water related thing. And
Yeah.
so that made it, hopefully both entertaining for the reader. It was a fresh
Beautiful
perspective on
thread.
it. Yeah, the
Mm,
thread, exactly. And then when I was pitching it to uh, potential promoters, I could say, this is what I'm doing that's a little bit different. You can read lots of books about how to podcast, but I think that there's a segment of the readership or listenership that is really going to be attracted by this specific metaphor that I'm using to illustrate the
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And so that can make it fresh as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to do it. And another way you can do it too is to collaborate with others. So what you have going there is just beautiful. But some people, maybe they need to collaborate with a comedian to get that initial quote up front, or an artist, or a lyricist. To collaborate can make a book much stronger, much fresher, a better read, and again expands your network. Because we all know the whole thing. If you can write a great book, but it might not find an audience if you're not able to market it. So it's having enough fresh things in your book that make it interesting so you can then go and pitch pieces from it. So you can also write articles, opinion pieces on whatever you're writing about, but make it more relevant to a wider audience as well, just so your name can get out there.
Yeah.
Um, we often go around thinking, just day to day, oh, we have an opinion on something. Sometimes it's just a matter of developing that opinion, adding some humor, and that becomes a story that
Yeah.
then, gets your author brand out there a bit more. Yeah, and gives you other ideas.
Yeah. I really like that idea of being able to tweak a message so that something that it's applicable to a wider audience. So, for example, there might be someone who is a fabulous gardener and they've learned all the ways to nurture the plants in their garden, but they realize that there's sort of a broader message. So they write a gardening book, but they realize there's a broader message about nurturing your community or
Community.
nurturing your children or nurturing people in your family or whatever it might be. And that would be an interesting stepping stone to something bigger if you can say, well, I had this kind of special perspective on this more niche topic, but now I'm seeing ways that I can expand it. Maybe their second book is a green thumb in your community or a green thumb in your family or whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was the second book I wrote, I actually used beekeeping as an analogy. So it was called Honeycomb Kids, Big Picture Parenting for a Changing World and to Change the World. So it was all about how bees work together in so many ways to make a stronger community and world, and they strengthen nature. So I was trying to apply that into like a family setting. What can you do to prepare your community and become more resilient, and ran that whole thread through, which gave it a different angle perspective than just this is a parenting book. It was like, this is a parenting book about all the coming challenges that we're going to face. And it was very funny because at the time when I pitched it to publishers, they're all like, oh, these things will never happen. And I'm like, yes, they're coming. Like, so I talked about how to prepare for pandemics, all these things that have since come to pass, but it was two-way out. And that was one of the reasons I first self-published, because I was so passionate about this topic, about building more resilient communities and families, and about kindness in community and all those things, that forced me out into publishing it myself. Because though everyone said, oh, it was a great book, they're like, no, this is so way out. These things won't happen.
Yeah. I'm realizing a great example of that as you were talking. It reminded me of a guest way back in episode 209. The title was Natural Orders and Author Email with Matt Tracy. And this is a perfect example because Matt he's an email marketing person, but he's also has a background in ecology. And
Yeah.
his book actually has one of the most beautiful covers of any nonfiction book I've seen.
Oh,
And because he built his whole, like where I use the nautical metaphor, he used the metaphor of ecology, and he had this whole very
mm,
elaborate and well thought out metaphor of how the way you interact with people in your email community is like how elements of the natural world interact with each other. It was,
yeah,
and email marketing, that's a perfect example because it's one of those things. There are like 8 bazillion books about email
yeah,
marketing, and none of them have thought to use ecology as the basis
yeah.
for how to
That's
write about
it.
that.
So it's finding that unique perspective that you have, that is a
Yeah.
combination of your interest, your skills, your network, your unique take on the world, and how do you put that into the book. So it's, yeah, so it's interesting, it's got a vibe, and it's just unique to you. I love that. That's a great example.
Yeah. Yeah, the unique to you, I think, addresses the pitfall of people maybe really do know a lot about a topic. They figure I'm just going to write it all down and then get it in front of readers, and that's going to be great information for them. But I think you need to grease the wheels of that relationship with the reader by making it personal and making it unique in the
Yeah.
ways that you're
And
talking about.
it's that thing about, would you be invited to speak on a stage about the content in your book? Now, no, if it doesn't have that strong hook or that strong sense of creativity, or you're not going. So I suppose think about, how would your book transfer to the stage? What is that theme? What is that thing that makes it, oh, that sounds interesting?
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. I have to think about that for a second because I've never thought of it that way, and I really like that. Do you think that
Yeah.
people would like, how would you go about recommending that people assess that, whether their work would stand up if it was being presented from a stage?
I suppose, like, when I read a manuscript, so if an author sends me a manuscript, I will be able to just, like, I suppose it's my marketing and PR background. I can, like, just look through it and go, okay, that's actually leadership. That's a really interesting point. So you can pretty much pull it out from an early draft, or you can put it in at draft stage, or you can go back to an author and be, this is missing something. And the something is that really strong thought leadership, or that really strong theme, or that really unique take.
Yeah.
Because as we know, anyone, including AI, can write a book. But what do you bring that gives it that humanity, that power, that virality, that vitality? So that's what every author should aim for, because the world has enough books. We could not even, all the books out there, we could not get through in our lifetimes. Everyone on the planet couldn't get through them in their lifetime. So if you're going to write a book, it has to just have some zing. Or you can just write it for fun, but don't
Yeah.
expect to reach a big audience. That's fine as well. Like,
Yeah.
that makes me happy too. I write for myself as well. But if I am going to actually package it and do all that work, I want it to actually reach an audience and be helpful to them in some way, or be entertaining in some way.
I
Um,
think that test of probably lots of people have seen TEDx or TED
yeah,
Talks, and watching a couple of those and then putting together what would be your TED Talk about your book.
even if you
That's
never
right.
plan to share it with anybody in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Could you encapsulate, I forget, they have 5 minutes or something like that, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's quite a short presentation.
Yeah.
And could you keep an audience interested for 10 minutes if you were assigned to give a TED Talk on your book? I think that is a very
Yeah.
cool way of assessing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that distillation of the idea into thing that really makes sense
Yeah.
or that's inspiring.
Well, it's certainly more inspiring for the reader, and it also feels much more inspiring for the writer that I think people who think of nonfiction writing as I'm just sitting down and I'm committing facts to paper would find the experience much more enjoyable if they were approaching it with the tips that you're sharing.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And it's so fun because
Yeah.
that's what we want, isn't it? Books that really shine, books
Yeah.
that help the author go to that next stage, literally, whether it's
Yes.
talking to Rotary clubs or doing library talks or being on a bigger stage. That's the great thing about being an author, isn't it? We can bring thoughts into the world and shape them and hopefully help change the world for better in some way.
Cool. Well, Anna, thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation. And I recently had a conversation with one of our colleagues, Roz Morris, about bringing creativity to email newsletters. I
Yeah.
think we have this theme of how can people bring creativity and freshness to things that maybe they've gotten used to
Yeah.
think of as being more like just a chore to do. So I am so
Mm.
pleased to add this to the arsenal of advice that we have for people.
Oh,
And please let everyone know where
yeah.
they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Oh, thank you, Maddie. So I'm at annafeatherstone.com is a great place to catch up with me, and also boldauthors.com, which is where I get other authors together too to put up little mini courses on something that they're really passionate about. So it's only very young, but anyway. But yeah, annafeatherstone.com is a great spot.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maddie.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Anna. Are you a nonfiction writer? And if yes, what steps do you take to keep your work fresh? I would love to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube, and while you're at it, please subscribe. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Maddie a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.